Yes.
There's still a.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the December 17th meeting of the Land Use Committee. This is meeting 2 of December. We are here to discuss one item. We are going to have the business session for the Gansevoort Market. Is it Gansevoort Market or Gansevoort Plaza?
Square.
Gansevoort Square, the Gansevoort Square development that was presented by the city at our first land use meeting last week. I am Eugene Yu, Chair of the Land Use Committee.
Katie Bordenaro, Vice Chair.
Susan Wittenberg.
Carter Booth.
Online.
Frederica Siegel.
Ella Fitzgerald.
Carol Fernandez.
Okay. All right, and we have from CB2, Valerie De La Rosa. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time. Executive committee will be starting at 6:30, so we're going to have to end a little bit before that. We did not have a chance to discuss anything after the presentation from last Wednesday. We had to clear out of the room at 10 p.m. sharp. So unfortunately, we had to cut the meeting short right at that time. We had a very busy meeting. We had a very busy public session, but I am glad that we had a lot of very useful questions from the committee. I was very pleased to see that we had a good breadth of questions. I think that the types of questions we answered were not duplicative. And, you know, we got a lot of answers from the EDC. I think in some ways, I think some of the plan was shown to be parts, you know, that they had not completely thought of. Other parts, it seems like they've already decided on some parameters and were not up for negotiations, such as the division between how much of the land is apportioned between the Whitney, the Friends of the High Line, the public space, and the housing. I think we were told pretty definitively that that was not up for consideration. One thing we did learn at that meeting, well, something I learned was that the right of first offer that the Whitney had, in a way, precluded the city from competitively bidding on the land. So they, right ahead of time, they carved out with the Whitney the 10,000 square feet. I mean, Carter, you.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Because it was a right of. I mean, we don't know what the value of the land is.
Okay.
And they wouldn't disclose it, so we don't know what.
There were obviously discussions that happened before it got to
Well,
them coming in front of us.
and before they got to us.
Yes.
We know that.
Yes.
But I've done a little bit of research on these right of first offers, and in fact, the seller must first offer the property to the right holder, but then the seller is under no obligation to accept. So this is just they're doing what they want to do, not what they have to do.
And it's unclear, just following up what Frederica said.
Yep.
It's unclear what exactly is being offered for the land and what can be done with it, because the company's a land use change to allow residential to be built. So
Right.
How do you value the land if
there was no residential
if there was no
possible.
residential
Right.
possible versus the residential possible? And particularly if the height, et cetera, you know, that we've seen could be developed across the lot. And I think if I remember hearing, or I may have read somewhere, that the floor plates that the museum use is looking for are large plates and not necessarily height.
They want.
Right. They want the horizontal space.
Right.
There's no any architect who wanted to could find a way to build the museum the kind of space that they want, and over it to put another use such as residential. But
Like
I
we do
don't, I'm
now.
afraid I don't understand what you said, Carter. I'm not disagreeing with what you said. I don't quite understand. There's value to every square foot of that land, whether it's used for a museum or used for residential.
Oh,
And it's for sure more than 5 cents a square foot. So,
well, the original Whitney was transacted to 18 or 19 million for where the land that they're on now. And obviously that was in 2009, 2010, whenever that happened. But what I had said, if there's a land use action on the lot, it directly impacts the value of the land and what you can do with it. So for example, if you're building a 60-story building and you've got a 5-floor museum and you look at the value of what that land, what that we've been told if they want to do a 50-50 split, how do you value the underlying land is my question. So how would a right of first offer even be calculated? Because what is it that you're offering? Land alone it's the potential what you can do, right? That creates the value, and we don't know.
well, just up the.
That's where I'm confused.
I see. Well, are you saying that we know are you saying they spent 18 or 19 million dollars for the site of the current Whitney?
Correct, yeah.
Where do you see that? Because I heard it was.
It's right on the deed.
It's on the deed. Okay.
You can see it on Acris, yeah. It's
All
right there.
right, so that's 18 to 19 million dollars. Okay.
Also, it was reported in the press, I think.
Okay. 18.
But I think we were told that's not up to us to question that, but this all ties back into, the best use of public
Right.
land, right? Which was what our local council member had raised, what was raised,
Right.
discussion. So and it all fits together. I think I've not investigated it very much, but that's just sort of my open question is, we weren't walked through that part of it. So it's difficult to be on the same page.
I think we were sort of steered away from that. We asked questions, but they weren't answered.
And I certainly support our cultural institutions, and I may not have said that at our last meeting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have a unique opportunity here. And, as I said then, the city has identified housing as a priority. And now it's not an exclusive priority. And it's not an all or nothing situation, but it seems that the dedication of a small parcel at this property to housing is, that's the first question everybody has, is that the right balance? And then the concerns of the other parts of the community is that extreme height. And so is the trade-off in all of these elements, how does it all fit together? And then we're told, and I had shared with some folks that, the luxury property values in our area and the extreme, these are at the extreme end for the city property values. And this location is right in proximity to that extreme situation. We're told that 50% has to be sold or 50% is developed as market rate seems very extreme given
Yeah.
Well, you could say that that the museum is underutilizing their land and EDC is overutilizing the land.
I don't think anybody's going to disagree with framing it.
And to Frederica's point, I think at the meeting, which, I think you had some really good questions about what are the details of the ROFO. And it was really unclear, right? I think if I could summarize like what my interpretation of what they said, it was option 1 was risk whatever market, auction outcome might happen. Option 2 was the Whitney takes everything. And option 3 was what they presented. And it didn't really feel like, based on what we've learned in the last week, that is a complete suite of options to really take into consideration what could be done with this land.
The other thing that occurred to me during the interval is that the footprint of the residential building is 10,000 square feet, and they want it to be 60 stories high, and they want 600 apartments. So that means that you have to build 10 apartments per floor, and that is 1,000 square feet per apartment before you deduct for corridors and elevators and all the rest. So it's very hard to understand how they're going to sandwich 10 apartments per floor in there.
Is that in the affordable housing area or both?
There are rules that I recall from a project that land use had to approve over, I think it might have been Charlton Street. There is, and they said it at the meeting, that you have to have the same mix of size and type apartments for both the market rate and the affordable. And they have to be interspersed according to a formula also. So there will be people who, if they wind up with 40, 60, 80% AMI, there might be people on the penthouse floor who are in the 40% range. I mean, if you actually think about what it's going to be like to live in that building, the kind of building that they're going to create with that mix of tenants, it's hard to believe that it would really be a healthy functioning building. But regardless of that, if the average apartment is 1,000 square feet, and that's not considering all the square footage for corridors and elevator blocks and the rest of it, some apartments, I guess, could be 500 square feet and some could be 1,500 square feet. But whatever the proportions are of sizes, it's going to be the same for both affordable housing and market rate.
Can I go back to something I had asked Gigi at the meeting, which is what are we being tasked with?
Yeah.
Right.
Right, and they had put up those 4 entries on the slides, but it seems, I don't have them in front of me, but does
Yeah,
anybody
right here.
have,
Affordability goals, ground floor retail programming, public realm and streetlight and design.
Design.
Those are the 4 topics.
so just going to find the right slide.
It's
Next to
on
the last slide.
page 36 of the deck.
But I think they've really put us into a rubber stamp position here. And the only way to get out of the rubber stamp position is to press the Whitney to correct what we think are the deficiencies of the plan, because the Whitney is the owner of all of the land.
No, the Whitney is not the owner of all the land. They have the right of first offer.
Well, they've exercised it.
They're not.
So they've exercised it, so they are now, this is a plan that the Whitney has agreed to.
We don't
They,
know.
I don't know if that's the case because it's the first offer. It doesn't mean that somebody else can't make a subsequent offer, right?
The EDC is committed to the Whitney. What,
Determine the value of it. That's just my.
no, the Whitney is the developer, so to speak.
Well, no, the RFP
Yeah.
is to determine the developer.
They
building.
said
No,
that,
I mean, the Whitney is the prime, let's say, the prime developer. They've agreed to give up 10,000 square feet for the residential building. And they've agreed to have the 11,000 square feet of open space. And probably it's because they couldn't afford to build a museum all over the place. But this is the plan.
So when we look at the key areas for public input on affordability goals, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard from most people that the split is not okay. Is that right? So, and then we heard, I think Susan, you mentioned at the meeting, you had suggested 100%. And well, I'm just trying to narrow down, we don't have much time to talk about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm just,
Yeah.
right? So on affordability goals, then there's a mix, right? Do we want to comment on what the AMI mix is, or is that not up for us to discuss? I don't know, but these are just a couple of the sub areas of what's an affordability goal.
And that's only for 25%.
Yeah, so if we're gonna discuss this, the city said that it has to be fully, they're not contributing. So do we want to comment on that?
Yes.
Right? So I'm just trying to narrow this down, right? Because I think anybody on the committee, please correct me if I'm jumping ahead. I'm just trying to get, because we'll probably run out of time.
Yeah, the only thing in it, which I think also I would add on to that, Carter, is that I think it all sounds like we're all collectively, bothered and frustrated by how this process was laid out in front of us. So the fact that EDC and some of these folks kind of came up with this plan before they came to the CB2 and then basically presented us with this is the best option possible. And I think many of us feel that that's not the actual complete picture. I think I would also like to emphasize that because I think we're kind of being squeezed in between the site plan and asking us to do the best we can with that.
And I would add that, we stated at the meeting, why is it EDC and why isn't it HPD?
Well, we heard the answer, which is not an unreasonable, we just don't agree with it, right? Which is that they felt that the market itself should subsidize the housing through the transaction of the land, right?
Well,
But
they
they-
said
we heard
they-
that.
But is that correct? But is that correct?
That's one of the things they said, but the other thing
Right.
they said that this would be quicker.
Expediency.
Yeah,
Right.
that was their
But at
big
the same-
pitch.
Well, that was,
Expediency was the big pitch.
but how much time is being saved?
They've never said, and in the next breath, they say, ULIP takes a long time anyway, but
A couple of years? Because,
It's only a couple of years because they said the average HPD project takes 10. I remember they said
Right.
that. So
We
that
have
gives
not
us
heard
an
that.
upper limit.
I mean, they wrote it off going the other route.
So-
because
so I-
they said
so I-
it'll take 10 years.
but they also said that this is an area, right, where and I'm
Very
just,
high rent area.
yeah, it's a very high rent area. And that it was unique and they thought that it would, as we hear from the city, how long does it take for the housing to get to a point where it can be rented? And they've said that that's a priority, but is this exchange a reasonable one?
Well, they never said
I
that
also-
about
I
it.
also-
Or half the units?
Well, so I also heard them say that there was a limit to how much subsidy they could get overall and that,
25%.
no, I mean, in
No,
terms of
yeah.
the number of projects that would be subsidized
Oh, right,
overall.
right.
So they made it sound like this wouldn't be subsidized.
Well,
if
it
they went
made it
through
seem
that
like they didn't even want to
process.
try with this
Right.
because it was so
Yeah.
easy for them to get the
Right.
money another way. So they didn't want to tap this pool
Right,
for something they knew they could get built. And they also said it's such a high income, high rent value area that they wanted to maximize that. And
right.
they've said it clearly. They want, they could, that's why they want the big building.
Well, I guess another way of looking at it is this the best use of subsidy dollars if the rent, if the value of the land could support affordability? And I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying, another way of looking at that argument is since they can do it without subsidy, is that something that they've considered,
I think that was one of the points they made.
Yeah,
right? We don't necessarily have to agree with that,
yeah, they're saying they don't want to tap any subsidy money because they can finance this another way
right?
and get more affordable housing than we would ever have seen in this area. So they're trying to sell this as a bonanza for us.
We don't know that that's true,
Yeah,
Of
we
course
don't know.
not.
right?
No.
And 388,
Well, but if we use our time, if we accept that they were pretty adamant that this is the plan, that they've worked it over many different ways, this is what worked best. So if we were to accept that this is the plan, then if we took each segment of it, the open space, the museum, the residential building, and we talked about what we wish were different about each one of those components, I think that would be a useful start for a resolution. I mean, it might not be all the resolution, but I feel that the open space should be 3 times the size that it is. Right? I feel that the Whitney should not squander the value of the land by, if they only want to have 5 stories, that's fine. But the taller that they go with their building, the more context there is for the residential building. Right, so there's that. And what are our goals for the residential building?
I think that 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stories doesn't provide any context to a 60-story building.
Well, yes, I wasn't necessarily thinking of a building that short. I mean, what if they paid $10 for that land and they sold the land for millions to a developer? Let me finish.
It's not $10.
It's not $10.
Saying that.
It's not $10.
That is simply the exchange that was made to put that offer on the table. That is not the value of the
That's
offer.
not what the offer is.
That's,
Price of the
it's
So
the
what
price.
is the price of the land to the?
They would not disclose that to us.
Right.
Okay, all right, whatever. Let's say that they got whatever they got. Let's say that they sold their interest in it to a developer. The developer would build a museum and housing on top. What, isn't that a better deal for us?
That's, but I think that you're conflating the whole exchange of the money, and I think that we want to stay away from that. The point is it's not a good use of public land. We don't know all.
The museum is not a good use?
Well, I think that that's the open question. You know, here it's not a question, is the museum not a good use of public land? It's the underlying use of the land itself, of its development potential. What can it be? Could you have a museum with housing on top of it, for example? There's many
That's
different.
what I just said. That's what I just said, so.
No, but you're talking about value. I'm just saying that's the use of the square footage of the underlying.
I think we're saying the same thing, Carter.
But the open space, if you go back to the slides, and that's the public realm, it's not actually talking about the open space on the land itself. If you go back to the slide, the public realm is transforming 10th Avenue from the BID's Western Gateway public realm vision, modernizing the corridor.
I didn't say anything about the public realm, so I'm talking about the open space.
Open space, well.
So they're not encouraging
The open
us.
space requirement is the setbacks that are required between buildings.
The open space is going to be under the control of the Whitney, and the Whitney ceded its interest in that area to make it into open space. If they wanted to, they could cede their interest in more square footage and we would have more open space. That's my understanding.
The open space was explained to us as there's separation between buildings. And it's a requirement of the underlying building 2 buildings next to each other.
That's because it's so small that that's the only use of it. But if it were 3 times as large, it would function as a buffer and as a really nice open space.
We don't need open space.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
Frank, I don't know that I agree with you on that remark that we need more open space. I think the way that I see it, I'd love to see more housing, actually. I think the open space, I'm not sure of like the setback requirements, but what they communicated to us was that they wanted that in order to give like more lighting and window lines to the residents. But I think there were some questions of like what floors those would be on and if those actually matter. So I'm not sure that I see eye to eye with you on the open space, increasing that versus increasing, you know, the amount of square footage that's going to housing. Because I think that is the #1 issue, is how do we get more housing and how do we get more affordable housing?
Right, but everything depends on the Whitney.
It's noted as building separation for residential light and air on the slides.
So if I could just jump in and kind of say go on a slight tangent. I know one of the other time pressures we have on the timeline is the RFP issuance, which is happening in January. I did ask Gigi's team if the RFP was going to be issued before or after January 23rd, which is the date of our full board in January. They did not know. I think if it comes out before, then, you know, it really puts us in a bind that, you know, they've issued the RFP and then we issue a resolution. And so it seems risky to wait until January. On the other hand, with the amount of discussion that we're having, I I have doubts as to whether we can fully flesh out a full resolution in time for Thursday. I would like to suggest that we split it into two resolutions, plan on a January resolution, but then also have a resolution this month to ask them to slow down the process,
Yeah,
including the RFP. If they are really asking for our input, what is the point of them issuing the RFP after we issue a resolution? Is there any point?
Well, when I'm looking at the slides from the meeting, it says key milestones moving forward, and it commenced key stakeholder engagement this fall 2024. December
it's very.
2024 is not, and I presume the community is a stakeholder in this as well. So I think that they've already missed their milestones and they're trying to take away our portion of an engagement with this to jump ahead when maybe this should be moved to February. I mean, we're asking for a month, February or March. I mean, I don't think that's unreasonable. I mean, I understand you need to do the engagement. We're not here to slow this process down, but you need to include us as part of the process.
Right.
On more than just 4 topics too.
Right.
I think
Also the engagement dates, I think they've shown, we're kind of a slap in the face to CB2 and the people that,
Yeah.
I mean, it was pretty,
yeah.
Well, I think it's important that just, number one, slow down for a second so everybody's on board. It will move better.
Right.
It will move more quickly if everybody can find, I don't want to say that everybody will be in agreement because I'm not sure that'll be the
I
case.
don't know that we've ever come fully in agreement on everything.
And I think to support that, we can say that the pre-RFP engagement sessions
Yes.
are, late December and early January. And I think that that's indicative of that even pushing it back a month is not unreasonable.
Especially considering
So-
the holidays, right?
So with
Well,
that
they might
said-
want to also take a beat to incorporate what they hear from their meetings. So,
Right, that was a step
I don't
that
think so.
that was a step that HPD did
Yeah.
when they did a similar type of engagement. They had a report, they summarized their findings, they presented it back to us. That was a discrete step that we don't have here.
Yep.
well, maybe
So-
we should ask for that, though. That's a good idea, Eugene.
Well, I also just want to go back to the key areas for public input
Yeah,
are really restricted,
Yeah.
it seems to me, to these 10,000 square feet. We keep talking about other aspects and they're just
narrow it
talking
down to
about
these
this.
4.
So I don't want to miss commenting on what they're asking for
and pushing
in
back.
lieu of our extra comments that are broader, right? I think it's important that we respond to them as well as
I mean, cover the 4 plus more.
plus whatever it is. And so I think, and that's why I keep going back to those 4, we should at least frame that out
Well,
here, say where we need more information. I think our overarching goal, if we can fill in more information,
right,
but I do think that we should frame this so that the board is a position so that it can, if they do move forward, that we don't miss on making some basic commentary. So for example, the affordability doesn't seem acceptable to anybody,
It doesn't.
the
No.
mix. What that right mix is, I'm not sure we know at this point, and maybe need to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, I'm just
Well, some of
But
it
it's not
also
acceptable.
amount, yeah.
I also have a question as to the timing of when they wanted this feedback from us. I also heard at the meeting that when we're talking about affordability, like the AMI mixes, I think it was, I forget her name, she went up and said, she thought it was premature at this point to talk about the mixes of what percentage, which AMI
Is she the
band.
EDC person?
It was Sue.
Yeah, I know who you mean.
And what is an affordability goal?
Exactly. Well, that's the question. What are they expecting now? And are they expecting an answer?
But that's a question for the developer of the residential building to figure out what numbers, crunch the numbers and come up with the bands.
But you know
Well, no, but
what?
they want our feedback on that.
Wait, I'm gonna.
That would be during ULURP then, once you have a
but I-
developer.
The key area that they've asked for public input on.
Yeah, I want to just say one thing. We had none of this trouble at 388 Hudson. HPD came in, there was no mix of this and that.
We haven't even suggested this at HPD. I mean, I'm sorry, at 388. It's too early for that right now
Yeah.
at 388. So if we take a look at a similar project in our backyard, we haven't had to propose an AMI mix for that project. And we've been talking about that for
Said they're using this for a
Wow.
develop.
But it's going to be, well, I don't know, the way it's presented, it's going to be 100% the same thing.
Well, yes,
Yes.
but in
We don't
terms
have-
of like, but see, at what percentage of AMI? I think that's what they're asking for, is it like,
Well, and I'm going
10
to where
units
Carter
at-
is. Yes, that's,
it has to average out at, I think they were telling us,
but if we want to criticize on a bigger level,
sure.
why are we in these little lanes that they're defining? They're defining this 25% here, this 25% there, the 50% there. We don't like any of that. I don't like any of that. That's what I keep hearing.
But that is the job of the developer who's going to afford to build the building, to figure that out. When it goes through ULURP, then we'll opine upon that. At this point, what we should be saying is, if we agree that we all want 100% affordable building, if you think that's worth making an argument for, then we should stick to that. at
Well,
this
the
point.
RFP is not going out that way.
I know, but
That's a different, I mean,
But this is 100% city-owned land. Is this
well, I
correct?
think that's what we need to lay out.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, this is a.
And they disputed us about that from the minute the meeting started, right? It was city-owned land, but
There are a lot of copies.
there's a Whitney.
But we don't have to lay down and let them roll over us on that, even though it's, it may not be possible. We can still stand up for that hope.
Did they come to us and explain that to us in 2009 and 2011?
So
It's
our
a
first,
completely hidden transaction as far as I'm
so
concerned.
our first
Yeah, we were
statement in our
blindsided.
resolution should be that we need we need a more robust engagement in the public review process of this, or the public engagement needs to be much more robust.
We've never had
Is that
less engagement.
Yeah,
So
Never.
that's number one.
Yeah,
And
I
then
would,
underneath that-
just to add to that, I would just add that like their explanation regarding the ROFO of the Whitney has been very opaque, and I don't feel like they've been, forthright about all the options there.
did not provide us with the documentation that Janine
Well,
was.
but
Yes.
but let's just go back to the public engagement. They already seem to be a little bit behind schedule.
Right.
And so this part is important to laying out the larger project. And so that's the justification for asking for a little bit more time to engage here and to better hear from the public what's wanted. And we all, and there's a lot of different, positions people are talking about, the
Right.
density, talking about, even to whom is this affordable? There's a lot of issues that fall under that, but the bigger thing is just the public engagement part.
Well, do you see in the chat, folks, that
Tracy Johnson.
Tracy Johnson of Deborah Glick's office, that they're pushing for that also?
Yeah,
So, I mean, that's something to mention. I don't know what Eric's doing. But
yeah, and I think I even just see, looking in here, even what Pete had added in, from the original reporting, is that the 18 million that the Whitney had spent was about half the appraised value of the property. So it was a very favorable deal. So, that's another question. Is this a good use of public land? And it's not to discount cultural uses. It's just, is the value appropriate? And are they paying the right amount?
well, but
And as Andrew had pointed out in the beginning, there is a restriction on this land, so the value comes from removing it. So the value is a sliding scale of what the land use process creates.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of moving parts about, what's the best use. Also, Andrew points out too, that the 50% market rate is the best case, and that, I don't.
Can we see
Yeah,
the
they didn't
chat a
guarantee.
little more
right, yeah, they
clearly?
didn't guarantee a 50%.
But Pete is suggesting, as I suggested earlier, that we should urge the Whitney to be more generous. And the way that they can be more generous is to give more land to the building, more land to the open space, and be more and utilize their own building more intensively.
Well, the open space, let's just be clear, what we were told is cultural space.
Can I take this for a second?
Well, you go back and forth, Carter, though, between calling it cultural space and just calling it a buffer. So they
Well,
intend
it's
to,
actually
let me just
both.
finish my sentence. They
It's
intend
Frederica,
to
next to Hudson
program it
River
and
Park.
put sculpture on it. And they intend to like make it a cultural space. So the bigger the
But the
better.
point is, it's next to some of our Hudson River Park. I don't, to Arturo's
You need
point,
more
what do
of
we
it.
need more open space for there?
Well, because you're having a building with 600 apartments, they might want some tables and chairs down below or some.
They've got tables, well, that
Whatever.
I think is what they're gonna be using that sliver for, to do on 10th Avenue, is to do something there. The last thing we need are more tables and chairs. Have all-
But if you lived in a building
there's-
with that dense,
there's-
you might appreciate that.
The reason they're
There's-
building it so high is so that everybody has the glorious views and the high price, is what they said when they were doing this, so.
Yeah, I concur that we do have already like a very large amount of open space near that area. Also, like, keep in mind that it
It's the
will
only
still
area
be
that has
owned,
junk.
it still will be
True.
owned by the, it still will be owned by the Whitney. And so they can do whatever they want with it. So I think that's the other concern, is like, even if it's a cultural space or open space, like at the end of the day, like, they can do whatever they want with it.
And if you look at the slides a little more carefully, and I hadn't noticed this in the beginning,
Which slide?
this from the, which slide? Good question.
Doesn't have slide
They're
number.
not, are they numbered? I don't
What,
know.
they're labeled.
If you look where they lay out
Like forces at play.
This one?
that one and then the next one.
Yeah.
Future site plan?
Yeah, if you look at those two and where they note entry, the Whitney desired potential entrance, they're basically taking over
Yeah.
the whole block.
Northeast.
And so, presumably any open areas will be not free flowing. I could be wrong. If you have an entrance, my assumption is the entrance
Enters into something.
24/7. And then if you look down at this open space, it's sort of, it looks like from the previous slide, the open space is just the separation for the light and air in order to build that type of building.
Yeah, it's looking-
Yeah, they said that.
Yeah, but if you look at that, where the Whitney expansion, and then where it is, with the Friends expansion, which is the M&O.
That's not the same open space there, right? The 1,100 square feet of open space, that's not the light and air easement. is
It's
it?
this little
Well,
list.
I thought it's the northeast corner open space, the one that's labeled potential northeast corner open space.
Potential corner.
Which they also call the entrance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the northeast open space also is underneath the High Line.
Yes, we have the High Line on top.
So, because that's where Hector's is right now.
Yeah.
So in the site plan, when they're talking about the managed open space, we're talking just that
This-
blue, the
This
blue,
green. No, if you go to the next slide.
It's the green.
Yeah, if this slide. if you
yeah,
zoom in
well, it
there.
kind of covers both in that diagram.
Well, I think that the second diagram is outlined on the ground,
Mhm.
whereas the other is is just noting a little differently.
The overlay of the
Yeah,
high line is on there.
Yeah, and the open space goes under that as well, in the, here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this, they've combined them into one big open space. On this one, it's the blue area and the green area.
Yeah, but then the housing,
Yeah.
these semicircles aren't,
But with,
Right.
we have to be careful, we're just in using our time and sort of figuring this out, but it's like, what do we frame out in the first resolution?
more time.
Well, it's more time, and I think that there's a lot of reasons for that, so that's, we just need to fill in the reasons.
The reasons, yeah.
Well, I mean,
I agree.
They're late. I mean, they're talking about the fall. ends in
Where,
2
yeah,
days,
where is the wording for the fall? I mean, that's fine, we can find it later, but if it's in the presentation.
It's in there on
I think we-
34.
And I think we point that out, right? That
Yeah.
they specifically
They
call it a
came-
fall engagement. It's December.
It was 10 days.
Well, it's community
before-
stakeholder,
When they came to the community, it was 10 days before the fall, end of fall.
Yeah,
Fall ends on December 21st.
yeah, they should have been in touch in September.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they technically made fall.
About 14 years ago.
Yeah, okay.
But we know that they originally, I mean, if we look at one of the press releases from before, they had talked about coming to the community board in November. And they came in December, so they're a month behind. And so I think it's reasonable for us to turn around and say, we also need an additional month for the community engagement.
In the holidays.
and so.
In addition, yeah.
So, and we also, I think, should just sketch out that we think that that the model that we've heard of the best scenarios, 50% affordability, doesn't seem like a great, or it is not a great use or a good use even of public land.
Public
Well,
land.
if we would just finish doing the city of yes, where we're talking about city-owned land is 100%, is there only possibility for 100% affordable housing?
Well, but they're talking also about financing, but I just,
Right.
is that a good use of?
If it were me, I would leave out that conversation for the next reso. And I would be loath to give up on the hope that we would have 100% affordable housing on city-owned land. I feel we have to put a
Well, I
stake
think we should just make
for
that-
that, in it, just for aspirational purposes.
But I think it's important to point out, there is no support for this from our
Yeah,
community.
there's no support for this model.
This model.
I mean, this coming in is, that's the engagement is 50-50, is, it's not acceptable.
Well, forget the percentages or the bands or anything. I think that with the point you just made, that there's no support for this is a very good one. And I think that's worth voting on. Leave out the 4 topics. Talk about the fact that this is just hurtling along, that it hasn't been transparent from the beginning, and that we would like to see the RFP before it goes out. And we would like to see what it looks like and how it reflects the results of the meeting with us and the meetings with the public.
We want to
We would
see.
also
Remember,
like to see-
excuse me, just
we'd
one more
also
thing.
like to
Remember,
also
we
like-
did ask for that at 388.
We didn't get it.
We'd also like to see a report of the public engagement process and what they learn from those
Yeah,
2
very
mouth
good.
sessions.
Very good.
Yeah, I agree. I'd also just like to, I think I communicated this before, that 100% affordable housing, I think, is an admirable goal that we should definitely strive to. But I would not say that it's either that or no housing. You know, like, I think we do have to be realistic.
Well, nobody's said that.
What do you think?
The point here is that it's a subsidy model that's being used, as opposed to where you have a large tract of land, and here it's how it's being used. Is market rate housing on public land a good use, or should
Yeah.
that be refigured
Let's put
out?
as much affordable housing as we can get, but I just want to make that clear that I don't think it's either 100% affordable or nothing.
We're not saying that.
I don't think
But
anyone here is saying
the
that.
starting point of this discussion is not acceptable as a place to start the discussion, I think is what the point is, and that's the 50% is the best, and that's just not okay.
Well, it's not unreasonable for us to ask, why not 100% when every other city-owned, every other project on, not just every project on city-owned land is 100% affordable, right?
And that's what
This is the
the-
exception.
I think we gotta stop.
Okay.
We gotta move on.
Okay.
This
Yeah.
is not,
We're at
everybody's in
5:15.
agreement on that.
Okay.
That's fine.
But the other parts of this are the ground floor retail program. So I've mentioned this to a lot of people, right? You know, if this is public land, what is a good engagement point for the public on ground floor retail? I don't have an answer for that, but I'm just putting that out there as a question. I think that we need to think about that a little bit more. I'm not sure that continuing the model of some of the other usage of the ground floors in this immediate community is really a great public engagement point on, you know, publicly owned site. I'm not sure that we need more high-end super luxury retail stores there. So when you have a ground floor retail programming,
Mhm.
what would be some aspirational goals of what the ground floor could be? Now, again,
That's
I
not
don't have a right
necessarily
answer.
retail, right?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that, but people should be thinking about that because this is the part where we would put that input in. But it's also something where there could be some flexibility if whatever the model is for the housing upstairs. I mean,
I asked if there would be retail and then they said no, and then they said yes. And
Well, it says ground floor retail.
Well, they
program,
have-
So I don't, you know.
but if you recall, the question was, what are you going to put opposite the Washington Street retail corridor that is so lively? And they said not retail, and then they said yes to retail. But if you go up the High Line to 18th Street, where
Yeah, but Frederica, let's just stop for a second there because there is no retail across on Washington Street on this model. It is open space, in the Whitney.
no, I'm saying the existing retail on the other side of the
No, no,
street.
but I understand, but we don't have any
In the
input
site diagram.
on the site diagram on Washington Street. The only part is on the western end of Little West 12th Street and 10th
Well,
Avenue.
I asked the question. I think this part of the discussion is premature, and given the time, we should just talk about what we want to say in the first reso.
And
Okay, but
I just want to say one factual thing, Carter. Because of the changes after Sandy, I believe that they have to have 13 feet before they can start residential. So they're
Whatever it is,
lobby or something.
irrespective of that,
It's going to be
the
safe.
input points,
Oh, stop.
of ground floor retail mix is on the northwest corner of the block, which is on the western end of Little West
Yes,
12th
there it is.
and 10th Avenue. And so do we have an input if we do what's a better use than market rate retail? What would we want to suggest? And that's something for people to think about because we may not be putting input here, but it's one of the 4 areas of what we're chiming in.
Exactly. And if
So-
HPD were running it, they would come with some ideas like that, Charette.
So
Stella has her hand
Stella, did we hear from you?
Yeah, I was just thinking, so I agree that the December reso should be listing out reasons why we need more time, why we want at least another month from them. And I think that we could add to that list. We as a board need time to hear from the community about what they want that ground floor use to be. Because they come to us and say, what do you want? And then right now we're saying that we personally, the 8 of us or however many are sitting here, we don't know. We need time to listen and to get that feedback from community residents and, people in the neighborhood. The other thing I was wondering if we want to add to a reason why they should delay. Do we want them to look deeper into possible city and state subsidies? Because so far it seems like we know that they're unwilling, but
Right.
should we include that as take another month to look around, see what could be possible. And then report
You
back.
asked, that's what she asked at the meeting.
About state funding at the meeting, right?
Right.
Or at least let them specify what they've looked at and doesn't work, instead of just saying it's not possible.
Without listing out.
Yeah, give us real
Yeah,
details that they
agreed.
made an effort.
And I think, I mean, part of framing this in our response is clearly, there's an opposite of whoever is doing this, is an opposite side of this, is that there's a speed, right, which we went back to. But in the quest for speed, it's sort of, to us, we're not on the same page as whatever that is, because we've not been properly moved along the thinking process.
Right.
Right.
And so, you know, we're being told just accept that, but I don't think we do.
No.
And when I look at these four aspects too, the public realm and street life is also an engagement with some of the, you know, the bid controls a big chunk of this area around there. We don't know what's happening with the site to the north, which is state-owned. Is the state have objectives that they'd like to fulfill, you know, New York City's immediate housing crisis? Are they going to be engaging with that? What's going on there? And then this ties into the design, which is the fourth element, which is the 60-story building. That's where we have, I think, a lot of different thinking on this. But, you know, design is a lot of it is height, but this is a part which a lot of people don't seem to think that the 60 stories height in trade-off for low height use next to it is a great relationship.
Right.
And, you know, the design, perhaps there are other ways to find a better balance within the design, if we look at it that way. But the design itself, I mean, is a 60-story building. I mean, it's a big, the largest design feature is the height.
I mean, I'm not saying, obviously, if they had a
And even if
30-story
it's-
building and a 30,
But even if it's
better.
half, the
Yeah.
height.
We weren't
Yeah.
presented, we weren't presented any alternatives at all.
Exactly, Susan. Yeah.
I mean, that's just a simplistic split, but that's half the height, you know, so the MoMA built on top of itself to, you know, build housing and used it for their advantage. So that's why when they presented it to us, and in this little corner, there's this giant tower, and the architect's saying it's magnificent, it won't make shadows.
So it's interesting too, because I think that if you go back to the article, if it's the article I think that Pete had shared, you know, it also talks about even some of the issues within the Whitney itself on the original deal on what is their objectives. And I think, and I don't have it, not reading it right in front of me, but, you know, there's also for them as a cultural institution, this building that they're in is an important building, but has that vision ever considered putting housing on top of it? You know, is this mix, do we have to accept that? Or, you know, is there still room for a further discussion there?
I mean, going back to what we said before about the time frame, I mean, just imagine how much has gone into this plan, you know, so that by not bringing the community in, or, you know, earlier on, I mean, all these questions they discussed it in the beginning, and they came up with this solution. And now, you know, they're saying to us, you know, like, well, this is how it is, you know, you get this tiny tweak, and it's so profound. And, you know, we were just completely excluded. And it's the Whitney, which is one of the things that are supposed to be the great benefit to our community, so that it feels like a double betrayal. You know, if it were a betrayal by the city, you'd sort of accept it, but it's the Whitney, you know, which we are such an advocate for, and there's all about the community.
This just seems like another one of the super talls.
Yeah, I have my hand up here. I agree 100% with what you just said, Susan. And I don't think we should forget the fact that the ULURP isn't for 2 years? And during this 2-year period, I feel as if everything should be discussed everything should be negotiable. If the first half of this process was marred by the subterfuge and secrecy, and let's just put a stop to that and have the rest of it be what a public process should be. And that would be negotiating on every aspect of it.
Yeah.
So there's no rush for them to rush ahead, even with the residential building, because as they told us at the meeting, they're not going to put a shovel in the ground until the end of ULURP. So what's the big whoop there?
Yeah, and ditto to Frederick and Susan. I think that is like, I think a failure on their part. Is what would have been great is for them to have this public session, even with like a proposed site plan or an idea, but then for them to be open to all the feedback that we've been giving them to make trade-offs and negotiate based on community input.
So in our feedback, we only have a half hour left.
One other thing from the meeting, I remember someone brought up, there's an additional 3 lots.
Yes, the state-owned
State-owned
lots.
lots
Across
north
of,
Right,
Yeah.
they're directly to the north. We don't know much
Do we want
about
to,
them.
do we want to discuss that in our December reso, or
think so.
leave that for the?
Well, I don't think we want to discuss, but I think that one of the things that we'd like to see is there an engagement with the state on addressing housing as a critical need? And if so, that might factor in even roughly into this.
Are you talking about the 2 parking lots on the other side of Little
Well,
West?
There's 3, but yes,
there are 2 parking lots, but there are 3 tax lots.
yeah.
3 tax lots.
Yeah, but I
But
want to
that's
say,
what you're talking about, and they're city or state-owned?
State.
State, okay.
one of the things that they said in the meeting was that the city, Department of City Planning didn't want spot zoning. And so spot zoning is
Right.
usually defined as 1 block. So if
Seems like this-
DCP doesn't want spot zoning, then they may be looking at those 3 other lots, because they could, it's not really a lot of rezoning, but, they would do, if they can get it on 2 different blocks, then I've noticed over the years, then sort of passes a smell test, but it's not so specific. So I just a little key that they may be thinking about those 3 blocks.
Well,
Yeah.
when you go over there and you see the Brass Monkey, which I think is like a 1 or 2 story building, it feels like the logical thing to do is to raise that building and incorporate that with the other 2 parking lots that are
Well,
adjacent.
they're privately owned.
That building.
Yeah,
so-
I know, but the land is very valuable and somebody could make a lot of money by selling it or developing it.
One guy has held his land.
Well, yeah, I mean,
His time.
one's the Gottlieb estate, and I might be wrong, but I think that Sean owns the other one. So those are your 2 people.
Who's the one in the middle? The guy
No, and then the
Standard.
other side is the guy.
that's been holding on to that forever, the statues.
Yeah.
But we don't know with the standard hotel right there, if there's some restrictions of, I don't know. We don't know anything about that land.
But the state land, again, we would want, this is public land, we would want affordable housing there. And now we have a nice little
It's a lot.
community.
So Eugene, can you recap what the topics are that we're going to cover in this reso?
So in the December reso, we would ask for the public review process to be less opaque. We would ask for the RFP process to be slowed down by at least a month to allow us to,
Maybe more than a month.
yeah.
I mean, we have
more
2
than a month.
years, we just said,
Yeah,
where's this month pressure come
Why
from?
don't you say for as long as it takes for the EDC to digest what they heard at their various meetings and for the community board to digest what they've told us.
Yeah.
and for the community board to hear from the community.
Yeah.
Sorry, say that again.
Exactly.
Let's not let them say, oh, we digested it in 2 days. Got to give a little sense of.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'd like to see the RFP reflect what they've heard from us and from the public, right?
Yeah.
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 We would like to have a report of the public engagement sessions, so a report of those findings back to us. We'd like to have a discussion about the model of 50% affordability. There's no support for that from the community. And so we would ask for 100% affordability and a discussion on what the best use of the public land is.
I think that one of the issues here, and Andrew had touched on this, I think I had touched on this in one of my questions at the meeting.
Yep.
Is it's bringing all the pieces together, and what we're told, speed is the underlying justification for this model.
For the cross subsidy model.
Right, for the cross subsidy model, because we get it to market faster, right? And so they feel that is compelling because it's going to solve the city's, contribute to solving the city's housing needs. But I think, and Andrew pointed out that the problem is putting all the pieces together. The financing of a more complex arrangement may stall it out, but in the end, it actually may provide a better solution to creating an even better model here. But time is what people are afraid of, is time is the killer of many deals and the financing. But, I think because the scarcity of publicly owned land within our community board and the opportunity is time, is the value of time. I mean, if it's delayed a couple of more years, but we get a much better model here and a better framework and balance between all these uses, would that be better?
That's they try to lure us with speed.
Right. And as many people know, I'm not so afraid of height. I think, contextually, if it's for the public benefit of affordable housing, but I don't think that it should be for, market rate, which is luxury housing here. That to me, that's not a good model. But for
they said,
what
about our questioning? What about our questioning why it is that the residential portion has to speed along and the other two parts are not in tandem with it?
That's something, if you read the New York Times article that Pete linked to in the chat, I think that the building was built much faster, the original Whitney, because they did not have problems fundraising. And so they had a pretty long runway to finance it. And
I'm not saying that. I'm using that disparity between the two speeds.
I don't think there were. I see what you're saying, between the fully.
Yeah, just let me finish my sentence. I think we should try and get them to slow down the residential portion by saying, if they're all going to go through the same ULURP, then there's no point in rushing ahead to define every single part of the residential building when ultimately it's going to have to wait for the other two and go through ULURP together. So let's keep an open mind here on the residential, and let's work harder to find more affordability, right? And the best use of, or the best combination of bands, of AMI bands.
Well, isn't the way this is all divided up is to speed it along?
I know,
and that's by creating.
It's not going to go through ULURP any faster.
No, but I'm not talking about the ULURP portion. I'm talking about the funding for each of the individual buildings.
I'm just talking about the residential part.
And that's the 50-50 mix, and not knowing where the funding comes from. Because if you put together a different model, it's going to slow it down. And then you've taken each part of this to make it the fastest.
Yeah, so what? That's
I have a question for Eugene.
So
Eugene, do we have any more points that we want to get into the resolution?
I think the other is, which I don't know if we had a decision on this to put it in this resolution or not, the sources of city and state funding. That was the point that Stella had raised.
Yeah, what other?
Sources of city and state funding? I think we should put that into.
Sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would say
Right.
in December, because why wait?
Yeah. Why wait on that one? That's a fully formed question that we can ask now.
Yeah, show us what they've done. Yeah.
Right.
The other just open part of this is if we don't think that this housing footprint is okay, do we want to put anything into the resolution about engaging with the two other users of the space? You know, is this a done deal on this discussion point, or is it not?
I'd
And
like just to
think
say
if
that we feel that in the crisis situation that we're in, that everybody has acknowledged from top to bottom, why would we go ahead with our project on public land where the housing is only 15%?
well, I think that the people to ask that of are the cultural institutions that have the ROFO, right?
Everybody's going to read it. So if we put it in our reso, they'll read it. Right?
Yeah.
No, but I mean,
You gotta put it
calling them
right.
out specifically.
Yeah.
I think
I
that's
mean,
worthwhile.
as Pete said, and as I said before, a lot of this depends on the generosity of the Whitney, since they have control of the whole thing. And I don't think we should be afraid to press them to be more generous.
Well, do we want to say this now or hold on to that?
No, I
until
don't, no, I
after
don't
the
think now.
resolution?
I don't think now, but ultimately.
I also think that there are other ways in which this can be worked out. The problem is it may delay the Whitney for an extra 5 years, 10 years to put all this funding, building together. I mean, that's.
But they don't have the money
And
yet.
they have a.
Delays their fundraising.
But
That's
it
what
delays the process of them being able to move forward because it relies on putting a lot of pieces together. But it is the development of this publicly owned land.
Right.
Do we
Best
want a
interest.
better outcome? Is speed?
Is it worth the trade-off for the speed?
Well, you know, one of the things they said to us is the site plan cannot be changed. The community board cannot give input into the site plan. And that's a pretty
Look,
brazen thing to come to us with.
well, they may have already just made that determination and that's fine, but do we have to
That's what they
accept
said.
it?
I know.
Exactly. We don't have to accept
But
that.
but to what Arturo was saying, the group to call out is not the city.
Right.
I'm not suggesting that we call out the city. I keep saying that it's up to the Whitney to be more generous.
Right.
So that's
We
who
call out.
you address it to.
Well, it's who you send the reso to, right, Carter?
Like I said, that's who we address, right?
So let's focus on the December reso. Is this something that we want to touch on at all?
Yeah, we have to. If that's, we have to touch on it initially.
And then build on that.
Yeah, because I think there's something there about the opacity that the EDC and Whitney primarily, I would say. I think the other parties are also obviously part of it, but like it really does feel like primarily like the EDC and the Whitney came to us and said, this is the best that we can do. And
It's
that's
collusion.
kind of the entities that are, that they're pigeonholing us into.
Well, part of, if you go back, and again, I don't have it right in front of me, I didn't read it, but the part of the development of the site was to bring, during the last financial crisis, right, in 2008, was to bring the cultural institutions downtown to jumpstart this area a little bit more and, to some different uses. But in the intervening time period, a lot has changed. In the neighborhood, the whole area has changed, and south, north, east.
Right.
It's also just it's a bad deal, right? Like they're basically, it's a bad deal.
Too. I mean,
Even the Hudson River
the
Park
Hudson
has
River
changed,
Park
yeah,
has
so
changed dramatically.
the whole
Island.
situation has changed, that maybe a rebalancing in the needs is not the worst thing, and nobody's saying that the cultural institution should be shortchanged at all. It's a better engagement of all of these needs through that changing time period.
And then Eugene, can I propose into the committee one more point? I think it's actually related to what you were alluding to on the state-owned land piece. So the EDC, the representatives told us that Mayor Adams, through Executive Order 43, created the City Housing Activation Task Force, which basically directed city agencies to look at city-owned properties and do what the EDC is doing. And so we really should call that out and say, hey, if you're going to be doing this, if you're already looking at sites, tell us which ones you're looking at,
Oh, yeah.
so that we can start this
so that we can start this process earlier.
Yeah,
It's
right.
again, let's prevent this from happening ever again.
Yeah.
Arturo, did you
Yeah,
take
that's
a
a good
look
one.
at Executive Order 43? I did.
It's
and
very,
it seems very broad.
very broad.
It is.
It doesn't
We don't
like
know yet,
focus.
yeah.
Cross-subsidization is the only answer, which was sort of an implication of what they were telling us.
Yeah.
You know?
Carter, one thing, I think this is really important, is that you said any delay we get in dealing with the residential building is delaying the Whitney's start of fundraising. So we're delaying their development process. So that is something that, so the speed benefits them as well. And that's another implication that why they'll resist it.
But why would whatever we say get in the way of them fundraising? They may have been fundraising for the last 10 years for all we know. All of our little
If the
picking away at them.
plan shifted to putting residential on top of the Whitney instead of as they have it now, it might alter their plan.
Right, but they have a certain amount of money they have to raise regardless of the shape of the building. Do we want to ask EDC to make its agreements with the Whitney and Friends of the Highline Public? Is that something we want to ask, that in general, these agreements be made public?
It would be helpful. Yeah.
So that might be something to add there.
Hey, Bob.
Okay, so we would ask for the agreements between EDC
All of the agreements. Yeah.
Yeah.
and all the participants.
Okay, so can I repeat the points that we have so far? Open up the public review process and slow down the RFP process while letting us review and comment on the draft. Report on the public engagement, report to the community board about their public engagement events. The community board does not support 50% affordable housing model. We would prefer 100%. What other sources of public funding have you pursued? There is a deep scarcity of government-owned land in our community board. I want to point that out. I'm missing one in here because of that we are asking, tell us which other sites are under consideration under Executive Order 43 and make all of the agreements with EDC public. But what's the one I'm missing about between scarcity of government-owned land and Executive Order 43?
That there's no support from the public for this plan?
You were gonna put in the thing about the grants, did you say
Well,
that?
you can't say from the public. You say from the community board.
From the community board, yeah.
Stella's point about
we said
them
that-
looking for other grants.
Yeah,
Yeah, we have that.
That's number
That in
4.
here. Yeah, Katie had that.
Yeah, that's 4.
Okay.
So we have 7 points.
And John Paul has his hand up.
Sean Paul?
Hey, yeah, I was just thinking about kind of what Frederica had said and trying to have kind of leverage to get Whitney to play ball more. If we do have the ability to make things easier or slower for them, that's a point of leverage. And I'm not sure how that influences tonight's rezos, but it's just a thing to keep in mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure we want to use leverage of time and money. I think that what we want to do is moral suasion of doing the right thing. And in solving together, coming to a better solution between, the larger cities' needs, the institutional needs of, cultural institutions to work better to find both solutions, not necessarily money. I don't think that that's a good engagement point.
Well, aren't they consistent though? Because I'm thinking if you're basically trying to use moral persuasion and power of the people, so they're making more decisions in line with those priorities, it just seems to me a leverage point. Again, I'm not sure exactly how it fits into tonight in the specific reso, but to me, it seems like those are compatible.
Yeah, JP, I agree. Like, I think being mindful of the leverage that we have and that we can use is something we should think about. If they're trying to use time to leverage as leverage against us and forcing us into making decisions hastily or without community input, we should also consider using time in a different way. I'm not saying we have to, but I think it is prudent for us to look at our options and say, how do we negotiate with folks who have up until now not really negotiated with us?
I think that the time, the time is the slowness of the financing if you do any type of combined development. And that's why the Whitney wouldn't want to do that, because they wouldn't be able to break ground and build, because they would be relying on another party or other parties in putting together all the money, et cetera. And that takes them away from a direct relationship with their own donors and people funding their project. You know, it's an outside entity.
Is that a question we can ask to get more clarity?
I don't think it's a question. It's just a matter of what it is when you combine a cultural institution with any type of model.
Oh, I see.
Money from the city, other financing.
That's why the corner is
Yeah, you just
fast.
take it out and everybody's able to move on their
Independent.
own, independently.
Well, if they made the corner 100% affordable,
It would be
and
different.
they wanted to put housing on top of themselves.
Is there any other topics that we want to add to our reso though?
That's a great point.
That's
Kate.
good.
What?
Yeah,
Wait, say it again.
They have hit
What?
something.
What? Say it again.
Is that can the market rate housing be offloaded to on top of a cultural institution
Yeah.
and leaving the market rate, or I mean, leaving them fully subsidized on that
Separate.
other parcel? That's I hadn't thought about that, but that's an interesting.
Well, maybe they could
Next.
use MoMA as a model, even though
Exactly.
that
We were
was
discussing it
earlier, so they had no
Right.
obligation
But does the cross subsidy have to be all on
in the same spot,
property?
right? Well, it's like air rights,
I don't
maybe.
think it does. It doesn't have to be the same location.
Yeah,
It does not,
so if
good.
you're cross subsidizing, that
Mm.
might be a.
Fairly
That's a
certain.
great idea. That's thinking out of the box. That's great.
Okay, are we gonna?
Okay.
Well,
Are there any other points that the committee
I
would
think we
like
should
to
do-
Do you
add?
think that this reso is the place to make that point? Or just hold that thought?
I think maybe,
Let's hold that thought.
maybe
Yeah,
hold
yeah.
up.
But it's a great idea. I love it.
It is, but I think it's for later.
I think the
Really,
goal of this reso is to get us some more time.
Mm.
So if that's, we're still going to have another opportunity to flesh out all the other ideas.
Well, we also want to be led to this conclusion. We want better information on what has been determined. We were told, look,
Exactly.
EDC's already worked this out,
Right.
and EDC's, a different entity, and they're saying that that's opaque. We're not able to see it, but I think that nobody seems to accept this except EDC and the Whitney and,
The Highland
the Highlands. So.
and the meat.
one last thought, do we want to talk about
their first part,
the
actually.
importance of community benefits in this public land? And that there has to be a conversation about that?
Yeah, that's a good thing to bring up, Frederica, because, remember, and I don't know, I talked to a couple people about that. I don't know if I mentioned, I can't remember if I said that at the meeting, but we've been told, right, with one of the recent rezonings in our community, which we're not relitigating, we were told that the public benefits were not needed. Right, because our community was in a position where it didn't need them.
Yeah, but that isn't city
the
land,
public-
that
but
this
the
is public land. So where's the public benefit?
But the public benefit can be arrived at on many different ways. And
That's right, it's just a sentence that it.
But when I asked them right at the beginning of the meeting what the public benefit was to having a plan where only the housing was in the upper top left corner,
Right.
that's when they said, well, we don't, it's the Whitneys. So they just sort of blew that off by saying it's not city-owned land.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
I mean, we don't have to
Basically,
solve the
it was-
problem in the reso. We just have to bring it up, I think.
Well, and just to point out in the other one of the affordable housing that's recently been newly discovered was actually part of the Soho NoHo rezoning, which was in the East Village. But, that the public benefit here can be, this could include other off-site areas, just like, what we're talking about. There's many different ways, but this is a whole part of what is commenting on the ground floor uses, for example, that could be other types of, we don't know what the public benefit is, but that conversation we should be asking.
Right, and it doesn't have to be a ground floor conversation.
So can I call for a vote on the resolution?
Very good.
And if there's no additional points?
Can you just one more time quickly go through the points that we're voting on?
Sure. We're going to ask for the process to be slowed down an appropriate amount of time. A report of the public, of the findings from the public engagement sessions. We reject the model of 50% affordability. There's no support from the
On
community.
public land.
On public land. We would ask for a list of all sources of city and state funding. Talk about the scarcity of public lands in our district. EDC Executive Order 43. What other sites are they looking at? And then make public all agreements between EDC and all the other participants so that they can be for public review. And then you had one more.
I thought our first one was to really open up the entire public review process. We're we're overall critical.
Yeah,
Of
make
the-
it less opaque, we said, okay.
Yes, okay,
Yes.
you're right, actually.
Well, what was the last one that I just said that I've already gone out of my?
Last one was,
Make the agreements public?
yeah, agreements public.
No, there was.
This one after that?
It was, it sort of, what I put it in, we have the scarcity of government-owned land in our community board, and what
Oh,
is
no, the public benefit, excuse me for interrupting, public benefit,
the community benefit
Right.
of public land?
Yeah. Community benefits, right?
And the other thing is we've been told it's final, but that there should be some consideration about possibly reopening the conversation between
The site plan.
the project partners in this on like shaping what the final proposal is to maybe perhaps better meet, the public's need for housing.
Or maybe we could say that we reject being presented with the final site plan
Could I finish, Frederica?
2
Just
years prior
max
to
it against-
Wheeler.
Are you done? Can I finish?
Sure.
It's projecting the public needs against the cultural institutions, and can those be better mixed where both of their needs are met? Because this isn't doing that. And that's,
They're saying it is.
and they're saying it is, but
Right.
Building, that's how they're doing it.
yeah,
I
they're
mean,
doing a
they're
60-story
doing it,
building
and that's how they're meeting those.
set against a
Right.
really short museum building. And is there a way to better do that on the site?
Okay, we can add that in.
Is that finalized?
Yeah.
Because reopening that discussion,
I mean, they were pretty clear that that's not something they're going to do, but we should say that. Because
We should say that.
we were asked, we asked at the meeting, how did you arrive at that? What were the jigsaw puzzle pieces that you even looked at? Because who knows what they even looked at and they didn't
I
answer.
didn't say, no.
well, and
Yeah.
that's how.
They could, they just don't want to. Because
Exactly,
even
that's right.
in the meeting, they were looking at each other. When I asked them the question, they started freaking
Right.
out and they're like, no, but they're like,
Right, there are a lot of heads.
Okay, yeah.
And so,
We know Jeannie well.
so in our resolution though, should probably then also be directed to the cultural institutions
Oh, in the two, yes,
as.
yeah, agreed.
yes.
Yeah.
So I think there's still room to maybe reorder some of these, but I think
Yes.
we have the 8
Yes. We've got the
items.
Substance.
Yes, we have the substance of it. So let's take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any recusals,
Abstention.
abstentions? Okay,
Okay,
all
unanimous.
right.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, team.
Thank you all for coming at the very last.
Well
minute.
done.
Yes, indeed.
That's it.
Yeah, call for the meeting.
But don't go away.
Close.
Yes.
Stay tuned. We have,
People are on, rejoin us for our executive.
there's a separate Zoom for exec.
And I'm losing this. I can't sit somewhere.